Okay.
Oh, well, I'll have to give him a hard time because I've known Mike for years.
We're back on the air. We are back on the air with Andrew Kreig. I found out after an hour, I found out his name is Kreig and not Krieg. But welcome back to the Opperman Report After Show. I am your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We're here with Andrew Kreig, not Krieg. And he's the author of Presidential Puppetry. Presidential Puppetry. And he also has a bunch of websites here. One is justice-integrity.org. That's his daily one. And then he has one for the book too, presidentialpuppetry.com. Andrew Kreig. So, okay, I kind of cut you off there. But when we first came on, you said you had some comments you wanted to make about all the stuff that me and Mike were talking about. So just what do you want to hit first?
Well, first, before we get into that, I want to tell your audience what a straight shooter you are, Ed, because, during the break, I said, my name's actually pronounced Kreig, but I said, if you want to be consistent, I don't want to embarrass you. If you want to keep saying Krieg, that's fine with me. But you're right out there doing the correction. And, as a general comment before we get into all this current stuff. If reporters would just have that attitude, Ed, the world would be so much easier. You make a mistake, it's no big deal. The public will forgive you. And yet, so many of my fellow reporters, they'll stick through thick and thin with what they did wrong. And life is just unnecessarily complicated with that ego and attitude. Well, at any rate, here's a few of the things that you were talking about before, which I thought were quite on point. You were talking, for one thing, about the verdict in the Boston Marathon case today, the death verdict, and you were talking about the two young men's Uncle Rustlin. Ed, I was impressed. You knew a lot about that. I would just add a couple things because I dealt with that in the puppetry. One is that Graham Fuller, the CIA executive whose daughter married Uncle Rustlin, the uncle of the two young guys, he wasn't just a CIA officer. He was like right-hand man for William Casey.
Oh, really?
And so one of his big things was to target all of these countries surrounding the Soviet Union and try to destabilize all these countries and basically try to bring down the Soviet Union and stir up these countries against the Soviets. And to make the connection a little more clear-cut, so Uncle Rustlin actually lived in Graham Fuller's house, and they created, some organization to help the Chechens and the other people fight the Russians, recently. So, you've got these two Chechen nationals. I don't think they were born right there, but they're in the next place over, Dagestan. And the one who died, Tamerlan, he had actually studied at some CIA front organization called the Jamestown Foundation. And it's this kind of stuff that you start saying, well, wait a second, there's huge intelligence stuff going on here in the background, and then you go to somebody that also came up, Russ Baker, and I think it was Mike mentioned that who, what, and why Russ Baker's site has been following this. Well, I'm on a panel in New York City in 2 weeks with Russ Baker talking about these kind of issues, and I can say that no organization has covered this as thoroughly as Russ Baker's has. And one of the points that he brings out, and I brought it out a little bit in the book, but Russ has brought it out even more, is that nobody seems to comment that we've got this whole trial, and Dzhokhar Sarnaroff great attorney has never explained why did they do all this stuff. You know, and supposedly she had this big strategy that don't let him testify, concede that he'd do it, don't bring in any witnesses, blame it on the dead brother. And so here we see the result, which is he's going to be condemned to die. So what kind of defense is this? I mean, you know, my 9-year-old niece could do that.
He could have defended himself.
Yeah. And either way, whether he's condemned to die or he gets to serve the rest of his life in prison, he's going to go to a supermax prison. He's forbidden to have any contact with anybody or ever explain ever again what happened. Why did he do this? And then you take another look at this that nobody seems to want to talk about except some of us in the alternative media. But you say, okay, as bad as this is, you've got an entire city that was locked down and turned into a police state to capture 21, you know, what was he, 19 then? Okay. Has there ever been a murderer on the loose in the United States, and do they close down an entire city? It's getting us ready for the police state. And what's even more dangerous about this is you've got absolutely clear-cut involvement in the background of the CIA, and maybe it's innocent, you know, but why do we have to go to Who, What, and Why and Presidential Puppetry and a few other sites and places like your show for anybody to be talking about this? Isn't it like a big deal?
Yeah, you would think. Yeah, even the most common.
But you see, this smacks of criticism of the government,
right?
And we can't have that. You know, we can't even have questions. And this goes to, you know, what I was saying about President Obama and his background. And I talked to the bureau chief of a major newspaper about this years ago, and I said, what's the big deal about President Obama's transcripts? Why can't you ask for that? And she said, well, Rahm Emanuel wouldn't like that, who's the chief of staff. And I said, so what? And she said, well, you don't want him mad at you. And you see the kind of kowtow attitude that even these big journalists have, and I recognize that there's a reason, because I didn't cover the White House, but I was fairly successful, and you don't want to lose your sources, and then have your boss say nobody likes you at the White House. We got to put you on obit desk and maybe lay you off, but the public thinks that these reporters are out there asking the tough questions, and they don't dare even ask somebody, I'd like to see President Obama's college transcript.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Much less ask about, this
Boston
trial
Boston,
up in Boston. By the way, I used to work up in Boston, both as a lawyer and as a reporter, and I'm thinking, this is not the America that I knew, because when I started in the news business, you would just ask the question. If they didn't like it, you'd say, "Well, sorry, but readers want to know where's the transcript for the president?" And by the way, all of this stuff, when I talk about Obama, it's not like he got a bad grade or anybody would care. The guy was head of the Harvard Law Review. It's a big deal. It doesn't matter if he got a C sometime. It's, in my view, it's about where would the trail lead, and what I think it would lead to is he probably got some recommendations along the way that that people are saying, well, wait a second, why is this guy recommending him when he's, son of a single mother living in Indonesia, And I point to an example or two of that, like Percy Sutton, the bureau president of New York,
Percy Sutton,
who unwittingly said, "Oh, I wrote one of his recommendations to Harvard when Obama was elected," and suddenly people came down on Percy Sutton. By the way, Ed, are you from the East Coast? I think I recognize
I'm
fellow New Yorker.
I'm from Ireland.
Accent.
I'm from Ireland originally.
I'm
the Bronx. Come on.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a lot of people. Gaelic Park is up there where they play, this hurling, which is the most amazing game. It's like everybody's got it equipped with a baseball bat. And
I've bumped into Percy Sutton a couple of times. He's a very powerful, from the Bronx, Percy Sutton, very powerful guy.
Yeah, no. So anyway, he just said, "Oh, that's great. The guy wrote the recommendation to get elected president." And then something happened, and he apologized for mentioning that he'd written the recommendation. I was thinking, what's the whole big deal on that? And actually, I deal with that a little bit in the book. And I think the backstory there is a very powerful representative of Saudi royalty.
Right.
Had asked Percy Sutton to write the thing about a guy that Percy Sutton had never known. And Percy Sutton is probably doing this stuff all the time. That's the way it works. And he didn't think there was a big deal, but the Puppet Master's operatives said, "Wait a second, you go from Percy Sutton to the Saudis, and people are going to start saying, why are the Saudis writing about a community organizer in Chicago?"
Through the Bronx,
see what I mean?
Yeah, through Percy Sutton in the Bronx, yeah.
Yeah, and then you go to Percy Sutton. How does this? And so that's why things like the transcripts are hidden, and it's not to hide being born in Kenya.
Right.
It's to hide these kind of banking, intelligence, Ford Foundation, high level ties, because basically the puppet masters want candidates from both parties. They want John Kerry, Skull and Bones, running against George Bush, Skull and Bones, and either way, one of their guys wins,
But what do you make of the birth certificate, though? Because the paperwork is crappy.
Well, here's what I was told by somebody who used to work for Karl Rove.
Okay.
Is the whole birth certificate thing was originally developed to be used by Karl Rove and George Bush against John McCain, who was born in Panama.
Right.
In the Canal Zone. And so they geared up this whole campaign to make a whole big thing about it. And then McCain lost so quickly in 2000 that they didn't need to use it. So they got a nice little thing like a NBA coach has, a nice play that they can use. They say, "Oh, Obama, let's use this." So I think it's basically a distraction. I've studied it a lot. Some friends of mine include Jerry Corsi, who wrote the conservative book, bestseller, "Where's the Birth Certificate?" And I partly draw on his knowledge on some of this stuff. But I fundamentally reach a different conclusion than him. My view of the bottom line of the birth certificate, it's a way for the conservatives to delegitimize Obama, but also, in effect, threaten him by showing their power. And the real story about the birth certificate is not the birth certificate. I think he was born in Hawaii, but that when he was young and moved to Indonesia by his mother, that to go to a fancy private school in Muslim school in Indonesia, he had to give up his American citizenship.
Okay.
And that the conservatives who have concocted the birth certificate thing know that. They know that he knows the real story, and that the mother and Dunham and Obama, when he came back, played some games with his citizenship papers, and that this has been a way to kind of keep them under control. So, for example, you had Henry Vincent on your show a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about how he ran this Madam service, gay sex,
Yeah.
and that he got in way over his head and realized it was actually his partner, Kreig Spence, was running a blackmail service, not just a sex service. And the point was to blackmail prominent government officials and journalists, and with videotapes of them having sex with at least gay people, if not underage people. And so that's what I think a lot of this birth certificate stuff is. It's not on point, but it's a control mechanism. It'd be as if you were at your favorite restaurant, surrounded by 15 friends of yours, and somebody comes in, strikes up a conversation with you, pulls out a big gun, fires 2 shots, one on each side of your head with a loud bang, and then leaves. And you say to your 15 friends, "Did you see that?" And they said, "I didn't see anything." And you say, "Holy cow!"
I didn't see it either.
If that guy with the gun asked me to do anything, I'm going to do it because he scared all my friends who didn't even say anything. So that's kind of the way they work. And by the way, I'm glad I get a laugh out of you on that because I think it resonates for people who are in this very tough part of politics or crime, actually, that the normal media can't even imagine that these things go on, but they do. Don't you think? Or what do you think?
So true. I totally agree with you. And like I was telling the previous guest, some of them are just oblivious to it. Like my friend who gets on the plane and looks for Muslim terrorists, looking for hijackers. Yeah. He buys it hook, line. I think a lot of them buy it hook, line, and sinker. That are
well, it's they think they know, but they don't know.
Right.
And I got to bring up at least briefly Operation Mockingbird, which was the CIA plan. You've probably talked about it on your show. Anybody can look that up on Wikipedia, but it was a plan to get the top 25 news organizations in the 1950s and 60s to do what the CIA wanted. And the Washington Post publisher, Philip Graham, was the de facto leader of it, and the publisher of Time Life, C.D. Jackson, who's barely mentioned any place, but he was President Eisenhower's top executive for national security, and he was the number one executive or expert in the country in psychological warfare. And here he ends up as publisher of Time Life.
Amazing, amazing. Now, what about other guys like Mitt Romney? Because,
Well, actually, much of my book is about Mitt Romney, and I held off publishing the book until after the election because I didn't want to make it look like I was trying to influence the election.
Yeah.
But I part of the reason I wrote extensively about him and the whole history of the Church of the Latter-day Saints is that, here's a guy who ran for president 2 times. He was governor of Massachusetts, head of the Olympics, Winter Olympics. And it's like President Obama. If you ask people basic questions about him and his religion, nobody would know nothing. And it's not that they're silent. They just literally don't know. And I know you're in Nevada, and I hope I'm going to try to pick, as usual, my words carefully here, but it's a fascinating story that the Romneys go back to the founding of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, and that the prophet, Joseph Smith, was actually killed in 1844 while he was running for president. And he had a very ambitious agenda, and he was murdered along with his brother in Illinois. by people who hated him and didn't want him to get the power that he sought. And the fact that the Romneys on two different lines of his family were right there with him as supporters makes him not just a member of the church, but somebody who has a kind of very strong tie to the church. And the fact that the news media really didn't want to get into this, I thought was quite parallel to the Obama story or the George H.W. Bush CIA story and many others. Now, one thing I did not do was establish a clear connection to intelligence agencies for Mitt Romney. On the other hand, we know that the intelligence agencies and FBI grew beginning in the 50s and 60s and more recently to really like the Mormon recruits in general because, you know, they're clean-cut, they're religious, they travel around the world, know a lot of languages, get used as young people to talking to all kinds of different people, going around, seeing what's going on around the world. And all of this that's what intelligence agents do. So I wasn't able to track that to him specifically, but I did track a lot of other things that I thought were just as important. And it's just a fascinating story of the ascendancy and power of the church, and you know, one doesn't need to be opposed to it to think it's an interesting story.
Did you ever look into all those rumors, I guess you'd call them, about connections to Cuba and drug smuggling and that kind of stuff, money laundering?
I'm sorry, I missed the very first part of your question.
Yeah, connections
I got Cuba and that part, but what was the first part of the question?
Connections of Romney to Cuba, money laundering, and drug smuggling.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I did not specifically tie that to Cuba. Okay. Although I do write about it, similar topics related to Central America, and also, interesting enough, to Howard Hughes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and Howard Hughes was involved in a lot of that stuff. And should I tell the Howard Hughes connection?
Yeah.
Okay. Well. So Mitt Romney graduates with a joint Harvard law and business degree around 1974, I think. And by the way, then he goes to work for a consulting company where one of his close friends and colleagues is the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. And then he goes to work for Bain Company, that creates a new thing called Bain Capital. And to get to the Howard Hughes part, the co-founder or co-leader of this is last name Gay, G-A-Y. And Gay's father had been head of the so-called Mormon Mafia that controlled the empire of Howard Hughes in Nevada. Now you've heard of the Mormon Mafia.
Yes, I have. Right? Yeah.
And so here you have, and Bain Capital is very successful, and we know how they made some money out of helping start Staples, but that actually wasn't that much money because they kind of sold their stake early on. But they made tons of money in other ways, and some of it had to do with, kind of suspicious transactions or investments that came from Central America, and that may be what you were referring to. Kind of allegedly laundering dictators' money, or that's the concept. But to get back to Howard Hughes, when Howard Hughes' last few years were controlled by this group of led by Gay, and I'm sometimes transpose the names of the son who was Mitt Romney's partner and the father. And let me get this clearly. One was Bob Gay, and the other, let me look it up here. But so we got Robert and William. Okay, I think Robert was the father. So they basically ousted the longtime top operative of Howard Hughes, whose name was Bob Mayhew.
Yeah.
And Mayhew was a former CIA, FBI fixer, and really totally wired into all kinds of stuff in Washington. And basically he's out. And he doesn't even know what hit him. He's supposed to be this big operative. And so for the last 2 or 3 years, Bob Gay and his colleagues, including a brother-in-law who's a physician who gives Howard Hughes this huge dose of drugs every single day. And they're running the whole empire here. And Hughes is, up in the hotel with his long fingernails, drugged out, watching Ice Station 9 and looking like a street person. And then he dies down in Mexico. And the physician down there says this man didn't need to die. He's been neglected. And then $1 billion is missing from the Hughes estate, and nobody knows where it is. There's litigation in the Utah courts, and it's unsuccessful. But I don't claim to have connected the dots to the missing $1 billion, that's with a B, and Bain Capital. But when you think about it,
okay.
why, if you'd seen any reference to Howard Hughes during the 2 presidential campaigns, would you have remembered it?
No, and I don't think we did hear any, did we?
Well, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
But you probably
Myers would have perked up for sure. Yeah.
Might have.
Yeah.
Nobody's heard anything like what I just said, and we think, what are these reporters on the campaign trail doing?
Yeah, I don't even think they gossip anymore. Like they used to in the old days. You see?
They gossip. I'm part of the gossip sessions as recently as tonight. But what they're talking about is stuff that. It's trivial. It's like, well, I don't like Hillary Clinton, or I like Jeb Bush. It's like this kind of stuff. And, to wrap up this Howard Hughes thing, I don't have all the connections of where the money went and everything. I do point a certain circumstantial case, but the main case is against the media. So we got thousands of reporters, political reporters, who are covering the campaign, and they can't spend one stinking paragraph to talk about Howard Hughes and even if they don't say anything sinister. Ed. Suppose they just said, isn't it interesting that one of the most fascinating people of the 20th century, Howard Hughes, who dated every starlet you can imagine, was a producer. He created TWA. He was a defense contractor, created Hughes Aircraft, and was involved with the CIA. He was involved in smuggling. He was involved with everything you can imagine. And nobody can write even 3 stinking sentences about that when the guy who ran his empire, son, co-founded Bain Capital, where Romney made all this money?
Yeah, you're right. You would think that would be at least. But another thing that's never brought up too is Bain Capital also owns Clear Channel Communications, correct?
Oh yeah, well that's in my book too.
Okay, so then wait a second. We're on Clear Channel right now. But the thing is, I don't want to get anybody.
No, it's a hidden hand there. What do they own? 1,300 radio stations, which would never permit this kind of conversation.
So, sooner or later, they're going to find out. They're going to catch on. We're going to shut us off. But the thing is that it's interesting how Romney raises all this money, and then he buys radio and billboard ad time that goes into his own company's pocket.
Well, that's in my
that's in your book. Too. Okay, good.
And nobody wants to get into that, and there's self-censorship that's unbelievable, even if the stuff's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And here's one other thing: is people say, "Oh, so what? He went to Harvard. He's a smart guy. You expect him to make money." Now, here's what I'd say, and I hope it doesn't sound too bad, but I was very fortunate. I had scholarships to go to very good schools, and I know lots of people who went to Harvard or Yale and other places, and I got one of my 2 law degrees from Yale Law School. That doesn't mean that they make $500 million like Romney.
Right.
There's lots of people with law degrees, business degrees, or undergraduate degrees from top places who don't make even $1 million.
Right.
And so we can't just say, "Oh, he's a smart guy." We've got to look at all these people, whether it's Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush, or anybody, and say exactly how did they make it. By the way, just tonight I had a conversation, kind of a social conversation, I won't say where, but with a reporter who said, "Well, I don't care about history, I care about what happens now." And I'm saying, well, how could you possibly understand what happens now if you don't care about history? Because how are we going to know what happens now?
I totally agree with you. But let me ask you this. I was talking to Mike about Benghazi, and it struck me that because there was 2 incidents that night, and you know what I mean? And
well, you're dead on.
Yeah.
And I wrote extensively about Benghazi, the real story. But go ahead with your question.
Is that I think he jumped the gun. I think he knew something was going to happen in the Mideast. There was going to be like a October surprise type of deal for him, and he jumped the gun because it was just.
Well, you're totally right. You're totally right.
Thank you.
One of the things I talk about in Puppetry is how there had been the stage had been set all during the summer for the former special forces and CIA veterans to get ready to jump on what was going to happen. And there was a whole kind of organization set up with people like Karl Rove and associates of the CIA director, David Petraeus.
Okay.
And they had started generating publicity during the summer about how Obama was just exploiting the bin Laden raid and wasn't a real patriot and didn't recognize that things were dangerous over there. And so they're all in place, just like the Swift boats, Veterans for Truth, were to jump on Kerry in 2004 and destroy his strongest point and say, "Oh, he's a coward, a liar about Vietnam," and that makes George Bush look okay,
Who never showed
and the
up.
Same thing was all set up for September.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. Romney leapt out of the box with this statement. You got a great memory for this. And then his thing was a little off point because people had died, and he seemed kind of callous, and he had to kind of backtrack and everything. And so what I think really happened was that this, in a way, was kind of a setup to make Obama look bad. And to what degree there was planning of it, it's hard to know. But one thing we do know is that neither the Democrats or Republicans want to get into what really happened.
Right.
Because ultimately, people can blame Hillary Clinton and so forth, but she's the Secretary of State. The CIA had 25 people within a mile of where Ambassador Stevens was killed. And the reports were basically written by the CIA, General Petraeus and his people. And so if anybody was supposed to do anything, it should have been the CIA. And as you and Mike were talking, it was kind of a Iran-Contra operation of gun running through Benghazi, through Turkey, to Syria. And so the Democrats don't want to admit that they were running guns illegally and deceiving the public, and that's part of the reason that the 4 people were killed. But the Republicans don't want to get into that either, because, again, it would be like exposing Obama's intelligence past. You know, the faithful, they want to believe he's a big, kind of pinko guy who won't have a strong policy.
Right.
They don't want to hear that. Actually, some of them would, but the gatekeepers and the media don't want to tell them that actually he and Petraeus and all these guys were running guns to overthrow Assad.
But
now there is one congressman who kind of has hinted at this, and he should know. His name is Frank Wolf, and was a very senior Republican whose district encompassed Northern Virginia, and the CIA headquarters, who's elected in 1980, just retired, and he tried to bring some attention to this, and nobody would listen to him because it doesn't fit the script anywhere. You know, what do you think of that?
Right, and if you notice, they won't let it drop. They won't let it drop. Almost like somebody paid for this, and they want their money's worth out of it, and they're going to make it fit. You know what I'm saying?
Well, no, exactly. And by the way, at the beginning of the previous hour, I said all of us take some risks, and I'll confess right here that the biggest risk I took, probably in this book, because most of it's based on documents, or previous books, or on the record interviews. But the biggest risk I probably took was the story I just told right now, because obviously it's a huge secret, and anybody who actually knew would go to prison if they talked. And even Cy Hirsch admits this week that his story is not based on people directly involved, but a couple steps removed. But after my book came out, I was actually on a quite conservative station, a kind of Tea Party station, where a friend of mine from Washington, who's extremely well connected and at the highest levels of Republican and conservative circles, had me on his show. And I later asked him, well, what did you think about the part in Benghazi? Actually, I didn't so much ask him, but he introduced me to some of his kind of special forces buddies. So I asked them. He said, "That's pretty much it." So you see, we got to take some risks, but that was my biggest risk, and I think it's more or less confirmed. Plus, a lot of this stuff, once you start looking at it, it makes a lot more sense than the official version.
Right, which is always what I'm looking for. You know, what makes sense, not this craziness I'm telling you. Let me answer this. I have a question now. What about all these firings? You see Obama doing all these firings, you know, they're kind of suspicious, and even the Petraeus...
so totally suspicious. I'm glad you answered. You see, Petraeus was not... Again, I report this in the book. Petraeus was not fired for a sex scandal. That's the cover story. When you think about, you know, the history of the CIA or a lot of these organizations, do we really think they care whether somebody is getting a little action on the side? You know, particularly... I mean, Alan Dulles was notorious. If you look at the contemporary accounts, he'd go. One of his top aides is quoted as saying, "You know, we always dreaded when he came to our, you know, region because we'd all have to ask like pimps to get him a girl, you know, and if we didn't do it, he'd be out in the street looking for somebody, and you know, who knows what kind of compromises that would bring." And so, you know, if Petraeus was getting some action with a former intelligence officer, Paula Broadwell, that just goes into somebody's file, just like the D.C. Madam stuff, to be used if helpful.
Right.
And he was really fired, and I say flat out in the book, he was fired for his long history of disloyalty to President Obama. You know, he was, Fox News tried to recruit him when he was a military officer to run against Obama in 2012. And the Obama people thought, well, let's keep him happy and make him into the CIA. But when they realized the full implications of something like Benghazi, you know, which is borderline traitorous activity, they thought this guy's got to go. But they couldn't get rid of him during a campaign because people would think, well, this is disarray, and you know, Petraeus had built up all these, you know, he's doing the bidding of the puppet masters, right. Petraeus. And so if Obama had gotten rid of him during the campaign, that would have looked bad for Obama. You know, it's kind of like if you had a star basketball player and the other team has their bench warmer get into a fight with them and they both get thrown out of the game. Well, you don't want that. You don't want your star Obama getting into a dispute with Petraeus before the election. But right after the election, they called him in, kicked him down the stairs, and exposed the sex scandal. And again, they don't care about sex scandals. That's the window dressing for the populace. And to show what contempt they have for the common sense of the public, and I'll ask your opinion about this, Ed, but about a year or two later, Leon Panetta, a successor at the CIA, who was asked at the National Press Club when I was there, well, why did you have to get rid of Petraeus? And Panetta says, well, can you imagine, you know, when it came out that he was having an affair, you know, we couldn't keep him on. And I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking, well, wait a second. He assumes that news of the affair would come out when Petraeus and Broadwell had tried to hide it. In fact, did a good job of hiding it.
Yeah.
With, you know, using Dropbox instead of, you know, email and all this stuff. And these reporters are so gullible that he says, oh, well, we couldn't have Petraeus have an affair because if it had come out we hadn't done anything, then we'd look bad. I'm thinking, why does news of the CIA director, why do we think that would ever come out?
How did it come out anyway? It didn't come out because the press found it. It came out because Obama announced it.
Yeah. and do we think that they care so much about that?
Yeah.
I mean, By the way, one of the reasons I got into puppetry, I think or wrote this book, and even started the Justice Integrity Project, is one of the ordinary things that just made me think when I was in the business world, what's going on here, is there was a female DC madam, Jean Palfrey.
Right.
And this is around 2005, 2006. And I'm just reading the paper, going about my legal and business work, and I'm thinking, what is the big sinking deal here? I mean, you know, the telephone directories are filled with escorts, and all we hear about is Jean Palfrey, the notorious D.C. madam, and she didn't even live in D.C. She lived in California, and she was planning to retire to Germany. She'd bought a house when the roof falls in, and then it's kind of like this Boston Marathon. Nobody's really explaining what's the big deal here. And then I got involved. Two of my friends had gotten the 20,000 names. Two of my friends were investigative reporters, Wayne Madsen and Dan Maldea, and they were trying to piece this stuff together. And I was particularly talking to Wayne and trying to stay out of this in a way because it kind of undignified him, madam, and I'm in business and all this stuff. But I go, what's the deal here? And here's what the deal is she was servicing very important people, or her girls were, and it was a CIA-connected operation, kind of like Henry Vincent's was for the gay populace, except the female DC madam only dealt with women, and so they were both providing women for people in the intelligence and government community, but also people that they might want to investigate, such as visiting foreign officials and everything. And they did not want her retiring with her 20,000 phone numbers and possibly blabbing about this stuff. And, you know, I've gotten to know her attorney, Montgomery Sibley, and I think I've got a pretty thorough idea of what happened. And it stinks because as a attorney and reporter, you think that these legal and journalism professions are going to, if they study and report on something, are going to give some semblance of what's really going on.
Yeah, and they don't.
No, they do much of the time, but in certain sensitive cases, they won't. And I'm thinking, well, what's that about? I mean, that's not why I don't want to sound. I probably sound kind of naive or simple-minded, but I think, you know, that's not the way it's supposed to be.
And we might want to sum it up by saying she wound up dead.
Yeah. And again, it's a little bit. Many of my friends are split down the middle of whether she killed herself or whether it was made to look dead. Specifically, she was found hanging in her mother's tool shed. And it's a little bit like the Oswald situation, or, you know, some of my friends think that Lyndon Johnson was not just part of the cover-up, but he helped orchestrate the Kennedy assassination. And ultimately, all of these issues to me are kind of secondary. I mean, the main point, she's dead. Who did it is, nobody's going to get to the bottom of that, but the important thing is that she was kind of framed and driven to whatever happened, and ultimately it's the press and the legal system that are the biggest problems, because they're still around. You know, she's just one case, but there's many other cases, and that's what I'm concerned about, is the here and now and the future.
Along these
What do you think of that, by the way?
I think you're right. Along these lines, what have you come up with on Jeffrey Epstein?
Oh, lots. Well, first of all, he's the billionaire pedophile who was sentenced to spend nights in jail for 18 months. He was let out after 13 months. And he's got all these friends, Alan Dershowitz, his attorney, Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, and lots of other people who spent a lot of time with him. And the investigators in Palm Beach, Florida, found that Epstein was running this racket where, let me think of the numbers because I've written about this on the Justice Integrity Project site, where he had at least 80 girls.
Yeah, 3 girls a day. His butler testified that 3 girls a day came over to that house.
And they were getting them from middle school, not even high school.
Yep.
And they would get $200, and some of them allegedly, full sex with them. Others just the nude massage or whatever. But and one of them alone had maybe 30 alleged sexual liaisons with him, and the police went nuts over this and put a lot of their reports on the internet that anybody can see. I think the girls' names are blacked out on the internet. And the weirdest thing about this, there's many weird things, but one was that the prosecution reached this incredible plea agreement whereby if he pled guilty, they would drop their investigation of everybody else.
Right.
So all of the men, all of the female accomplices, all the girls, there could be no more investigation, and that's one other thing before if you don't mind, ask you a question. But this came under Jeb Bush's governorship in 2007, so it's a federal state prosecution, and George Bush is the president. So you got Jeb Bush and George Bush, and then the Obama administration enforces it. And this is the kind of thing I've seen and again that again helped prompt me to write this book, Presidential Puppetry, because you think, well, why are the Obama people enforcing, clearly an outrageous thing? And my question to you, Ed, since you're, law enforcement expert yourself, how often have you seen an agreement, a plea bargain, where part of the plea is that there could be no investigation of anybody else?
You know what? Now that you mention that, I don't think I've ever seen that. Maybe with your wife, you can get your wife off,
Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever seen that. You're right. That's so outrageous.
No, so you have hundreds of crime involving pedophilia and probably blackmail in a sense, and nobody else has to do anything. Normally, if there's a light sentence like 13 months, nighttime in jail, in a nice facility, by the way, it's
exclusive.
Not,
by the way, he was
nice.
the only prisoner in there. It was vacated by everybody else.
Yeah, and normally it's like to work your way up. Okay, we'll take the plea from you, and now we want you got to testify against Bill Clinton or something.
Yeah,
but no, it just all stops.
Well, let me ask you a question, because there's been a recent, because you're an attorney, there's been a recent ruling that the judge has ruled in the victim's favor. Now, does that mean that they can reopen and they're going to unseal?
When was the ruling?
Oh, just
I haven't looked at it.
Not even 2 weeks ago. Yeah, no one's talking about it. Not even 2 weeks ago. It just came out. Yeah, it's
what did he say?
He said that basically the victims won. He's allowed to appeal, so they're going to keep sealing.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, good.
They are sealing the plea negotiations until he's allowed to appeal. But as of right now,
that's good.
Yeah. You know what? We're down to 3 minutes, and then we got to go this time. It's a hard break. But listen,
20 minutes or 2?
3 minutes.
Oh, 3.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, this is a very important development.
Yes.
And if I got 3, I got to tell you one very entertaining thing. I'll try to keep it to 30 seconds. But Ken Starr is one of his attorneys
Right.
who negotiated this incredible agreement. And Ken Starr is now, he's the great righteous guy who's after Clinton, and he's now head of Baylor University. And he was giving a lecture here in Washington about the importance of religious education. And he was leading a panel with the president of a Jewish university, yeshiva, and Catholic university. And it was all about, you got to teach the kids, all these good things. And so I waited until after the thing was over, because I knew better than to submit a question. And I caught up with him, and I said, well, do you mind if I ask a question? And he was very, friendly. He's a big expert attorney. He said, fire away. And I said, well, this Epstein case, this is pedophile stuff, so why would you want to represent him? And he says, well, I can't answer that. It's an attorney-client matter. And I said, well, I'm an attorney. I'm not asking for any secrets, but why, out of all the attorneys in the United States, do you represent him on this sweetheart deal? And I got to hand it to him. He answered me, and he said, well, he was a client of my law firm, and as an accommodation, I was very happy to help him in his problem. And I was with an older guy who'd listened to this, and as we walked away, after I thanked Ken Starr, the older friend of mine says, so it's all about the money.
Well, and he pretty much admitted it. But let me ask
kind
you
of.
This, but
I wrote a column about that, But I know we're getting to the end. So what's the finale you had here?
My big question for you is that if they win this case, this lawsuit against the Crime Victims' Rights Act, does that reopen Epstein to new charges?
Well, somebody's got to bring him. I think probably not. Although it conceivably could, because you could haul him in and make him testify, and then if he perjures himself, you could have a new case. I think it would be very hard with his legal armada and his $1 billion to do it. But here's another question: how does the guy didn't even go to college, Epstein?
Yeah.
How did he get $1 billion? And
I've done a lot of work on this too.
And again, it's a little bit like the Mitt Romney thing. Well, okay, he's supposed to be really smart and everything. Well, yeah, I know. We know lots of people, but smart people. But does that mean that they go from teaching 7th grade in a girls' school to having $1 billion?
Well, okay, yeah, he did go to college. He went to Cooper Union and he went to NYU,
okay.
But he didn't graduate.
I don't think he graduated.
He didn't graduate. But then he becomes a teacher at Dalton School.
Yeah, and then he goes to Bear Stearns. But
the story is with Bear Stearns is he was tutoring the son of one of the owners of Bear Stearns and became friends with his daughter.
Yeah, and that's all fine. But I guess where I'm going is you start looking at these fortunes.
Yeah, where'd it come from? I agree.
Where does it come from?
I totally agree with you, man. Okay, all right, my friend. Thank you so much. Anything comes up in the future you're working on, give me a call right away. We'll bring you back.
Well, I sure will. I mean, here's one other part of it. If I can get 12 and a half seconds here, is we're coming out with a second edition of the book that's going to look at Jeb Bush, Hillary Clinton, and JFK and dig into some of this money and intelligence background for them with a 2016 look at all of this, because, we've got to ask these questions about the future, not just history. So thanks so much, Ed. I've really enjoyed this, and great job that you're doing for the listeners in the country.
Thank you very much, Andrew Kreig, right? The author of Presidential Puppetry, a couple of websites, justice-integrity.org and presidentialpuppetry.com. Thank you very much, brother.
You're welcome.
Have a good night. Okay, well, that was our guest, Andrew Kreig. By the way, I got coming up a couple of things coming up this weekend. I'm going to be doing an interview either Saturday night or Sunday night around 6 p.m. I'm not sure if it's live or not, but I'm going to be doing an interview about the Epstein case and reporting on that. And, how I get rolling on that story. Got another interview coming up, I think, Wednesday night. With Mark from Truth Funders. He has his own radio show now. He's going to be interviewing me. I'm interviewing this week in the members section, OppermanReport.com, the members section. Check it out. There's the Henry Vinson case that he was talking about, the Confession of a D.C. Madam. That's in there. A lot of good stuff in there. My interview with Dennis Hoff, who knows Heidi Fleiss and knows all those guys. That's in there. A whole bunch of stuff in there. A couple of serial killer cases, true crime stuff is in there. My interview with Neil Sanders on mind control. That will be in there very shortly, maybe as quickly as tomorrow night. You got to pray for my producer, Christoph Scott Moses, who's been out sick and struggling there. So that's why we don't have all of our shows uploaded to the website as quickly as we would like to have them. But I'm going to be working on that this week and make sure we can get it out to you really quick. So let's see. So that's what I got going on now. I got 2 shows coming up. I'm doing a show about the Phoenix Project with this guy named Valentine. I'm interviewing him crack of dawn this week. I'm getting up really early to interview him because he's on the East Coast. And he wanted to do it really early, like 9 a.m. So I'm going to be up at like 5 a.m. interviewing him. So that's about it. And next week we have coming up is the Marilyn Monroe show we've been promising you. And then after that, we have the FBI agent who investigated the anthrax case. We got some golden guests here for you guys. I got to tell you that, man. Thank God for that. We have some really good quality people coming out here and putting their information out for you here on the Opperman Report. I love you all. Miss you all. And I'll see you next week. No, actually, I'll see it this weekend, Saturday night or Sunday night, when I'm doing this interview with the guy there. I'll put that on. And maybe I'll be able to do something live this weekend on the fly like I usually do. Thank you all. God bless you.